Welcome back. To check to see if someone wins, we need to check the row to see if it has the same marker 3 times in a row. Check the column to see if it has the same marker 3 times in a row. And also check the two diagonals to see if it has the same marker 3 times in a row. That's a lot of work. Let's simplify things. Let's just check for now to see if there are 3 X's in the first row, and that's what this does. If board.cells sub 00 equals board.x and 01 equals board.x and cells 02 equals board.x, then return true, otherwise return false. And back in games.js, we check to see, we call the rules to see if anybody's won, and if they have, we say that X wins. This is a very simplified rule just to see if X wins on the first row. Let's verify that works, and then we'll start expanding this. Okay, X moves here, then O moves here, X moves here, and X moves here, and X wins. Good. Let's try it now with O, X, whoops, with O. So we'll put X here, then O, then X here, then O. So X wins, but we didn't recognize it. We don't have the rule written for that, and we don't have a rule written for O to win. So let's go back to our code in the rules, and notice that we're checking explicitly for the X values. Let's change this so that we genericize it a bit, and now we can check to see who wins. Okay. So let's go back. X and O and X and O. And if I click here, X should win. Oh, it didn't. And why didn't it? Because we didn't pass X in. So let's try that now. X and X, so X wins. And then O and O. Still didn't detect it, and that's because we don't have a check to see if X wins. Let's add that. Okay, and O wins. Now let's try it. X and X wins, good. Now let's try O and O wins, perfect. Our rule is getting better, but it's still not quite right. We also need to check all of the rows. What we can do here is make this a loop for let row in 0, 1, and 2. Okay, and change this to row and row. All right. Let's see if this works. Put X here. X, good. That works. Try down here. X and X, perfect. And X and X. Yes, our little rule works. Let's now check to make sure that it works for O. Whoop, I prematurely won for X. So there's O and O works. And O. This is looking pretty good. I do have to take issue with the fact that we're accessing the internals of the board method. Really what we should be doing here is asking the board to give us a row and then checking to see if that matches what we expect to see, that who the O or the X wins. That to me seems way to do this. It's a little more clear about what's actually happening. Let's go into the board and add that method. from that row, from the row that's been requested, and concatenating them together and returning them as one string. If it's X that wins, we'll see XXX. If it's O that wins, OOO. And if there's a value in there that's empty, like a dot, then we'll see that too. Let's go back to our rules. Okay. And let's see how it works. XOX. It's not working at all. What is this actually returning? Just comparing it against the X isn't enough. We need to say what else we want to compare it against. We need to make it look like what a win would look like. Let the win equal who.repeat 3 times. That's a little bit better. And then we'll compare it against win instead of who. Let's give that a try. Okay, XOX. And that's a little bit better. You can see XXX compared against XXX, and it correctly saw that X wins. Let's see if it'll work for O. And it works for O as well. Okay, this is good. And it works generically in the sense that it is working for both O and for X, but now we need to also check for columns. In theory, it would be exactly the same check, except that instead of for row, we would do for column, and we would do a get row, we would do a get column of COL. And then we need to do a get column. Let's go back to board and add that. Okay. This is returning the 3 columns vertically based on the column that was passed in. Let's go back and check our rules. Looks good. And so let's refresh this. And we'll put an X here, and an O here, and an X here, and an O here, and an X here. And that checks out. Let's try O vertically. Looks good. Let's try the far column. X wins, great. Let's try a diagonal real quick while we're in here. No, it doesn't do very well. We still have some work to do. In order to get diagonal, the code is slightly different. We have to go to the upper left-hand corner, the middle box, and the lower right-hand corner. And then there's another diagonal which goes in the opposite direction. And it's arguable that we should have one method that gets a diagonal and then pass it a parameter. I'm not sure that there's any logic or any reasoning that would make us choose one over the other. Okay, let's give this a try. First, I want to make sure I haven't broken anything. Yes, my columns still check. My row still works. Now let's check the diagonal. Oh, good job. Let's check the diagonal for O. Very good. We're doing pretty well. There are a couple things here that I'm not too sure I like. We're doing this row and then this column. These are actually doing the same thing. In theory, we could do this, and that would simplify things a bit. It continues to work. I want to also point out that it's not the board that figures out that something has won or someone has won. It's the rules, right? These are the rules that we use to determine when somebody has won. And when we write the code that is basically our artificial intelligence that tries to figure out what move the computer should make, we will come back to these rules and ask these rules whether or not someone has won, and the computer will use these rules to try and figure out what its next move will be. Oh, there is one thing missing, and that is the cat's game. What does it look like when there's no winner? We haven't captured that. In order to check for a draw, again, we go to the rules, and then we can do a check draw, and it doesn't matter who it is that we're checking on. And this is actually pretty simple. It turns out that if any cell is empty, then it's not a draw because we know it's not a win. We've already checked that. It's not a loss. So that's all we need to check. Let's go back to our game and add that rule in, or add that check in. Okay. Let's try again. X, O, X, O, X, O, and X. It's the cat's game. Now we've completed the rules for checking for a win, loss, or draw. We've successfully moved between alternate users making moves. Now let's actually go in and add the last bit, which is the logic to choose our next move. Stay tuned for that.